Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. So I have a video that's going to be very informative for you, and it's going to be about why Bitcoin Cash exists and why it's still a thing. So Bitcoin Cash has a really interesting history, and if you learn its history, it will give you a lot of insight as to the philosophical underpinnings of Bitcoin, and there's an ideological schism that is still kind of going on to this day. It has a big impact on the overall direction of Bitcoin, and I think it's worth understanding what this is if you want to have a better understanding of where Bitcoin's going to be in the future. So what happened with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash goes back to an event called the Block Wars, and it's every bit as exciting as it sounds. Hang on, let's get this here. So what happened with the Block Wars is that there were two prominent communities within the Bitcoin within the Bitcoin organization. What was it called? The Bitcoin Foundation, right? And there was people that believed that the size of the blocks were too small, and this was ultimately what was preventing Bitcoin from having a higher throughput, a higher transactions per second. One of the problems with Bitcoin is that you just simply couldn't use Bitcoin for regular transactions and purchases. You couldn't just go to the grocery store and buy Bitcoin. And it's not because there aren't enough people that are into Bitcoin. It's simply the fact that it's impractical. You can't expect that the vendor's going to wait around for 30 or 40 minutes waiting for the transaction to confirm. And at the same time, you as as a buyer, can't expect it to be to pay upwards of maybe even $10 for a Bitcoin transaction, right? But this is what Bitcoin was supposed to be used for. It was not supposed to be used to speculate, right? Which is unfortunately what the vast majority of Bitcoin holders are using it for. And that even includes institutions. They simply buy it because line go up, but they're not using it for what it's meant for. So Bitcoin, a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash, would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. But make it clear, it's purely a peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. Cash is supposed to be something that you're using, right? It's not something you're supposed to hoard and stuff under your bed, although you can do it. You're supposed to use it, right? Now, this was the vision of Bitcoin, but at this stage, and even up until now, no one really uses Bitcoin to buy and sell things, at least to scale. And this bothered a number of people in the Bitcoin community, and their solution to make this happen was to increase the size of the blocks in the Bitcoin blockchain. That would allow more transactions to happen, and it would also allow Bitcoin to become cheaper. So the big blockers, which is what they were called, they wanted to modify the original Bitcoin protocol to increase block capacity and process more transactions. They believed that cheaper, faster transactions would make Bitcoin more scalable and therefore more accessible. While increasing the block size may not be a permanent solution, some suggested it would help keep transactions cheap in the short term and allow more time for scaling solutions to potentially develop. This would allow Bitcoin to compete on the global stage as an alternative payment system to companies like Visa or PayPal. So what about the opposite side? These were the original Bitcoin maxis, the same kind of Bitcoin maxis we have to now, originated from the small blocker community, and this is the one that eventually won out in the end. So small blockers fought to keep the 1 megabyte size limit in place to prioritize Bitcoin's fundamental principles of security and decentralization. Small blockers believed that if the block size increased, it would become too expensive for individual users to run a Bitcoin node. This would lead to companies hosting nodes in data centers, which would compromise decentralization of the network. They believed in system resilience and taking a long-term approach to increasing Bitcoin's market share. So there's a few things to unpack here. So first is that there was such a disagreement between what was going to happen that the people that wanted to make Bitcoin block size bigger and those who wanted to make Bitcoin block sizes smaller ultimately had such a competing worldview that at some stage Bitcoin was going to have to fork and one was going to have to go in one direction, the other was going to go into another direction, right? Because they couldn't sort out their differences. And only one is going to retain the name of Bitcoin, and the other would have to go with another direction, right? But fundamentally, this is still the same Bitcoin. The only difference is that one is going to have a bigger block size, and one is going to have a smaller block size. But fundamentally, it's still going to be the exact same thing. In every way, shape, or form, one is just going to have a bigger block size and have faster transactions, and the other isn't. It's as simple as that. So ultimately, whoever would be able to convince more miners, and whoever the miners were more inside of, would ultimately be the one that would have the voting power to sway this little blockchain election. And that would basically determine who would get to retain the name of Bitcoin and who would have to become Bitcoin something else, right? So ultimately, the Bitcoin miners and the nodes and whatever, and all the people, and the majority of the people in this foundation ended up deciding to go with smaller blocks and retaining the status quo. And this is ultimately why Bitcoin is Bitcoin. And the people that didn't, who were the minority in this, forked off their own chain that was still Bitcoin, but they just had bigger block sizes, and they had to change their name because there can only be one Bitcoin. Therefore, they had to change their name to Bitcoin Cash. And the people who were in the minority made it their focus to make Bitcoin Cash be seen as the Bitcoin, because it was originally the Bitcoin. There's now two forms of Bitcoin, except they wanted to put it into the minds of the people in the crypto community that Bitcoin Cash was in fact the de facto Bitcoin. And whilst Bitcoin, they didn't really have to, the people on the smaller block size community, they didn't really have to think about this, right? Because they've got the same name, and they have retained de facto control over the hearts and minds of people, that when they think of Bitcoin, they just think of this one, right? When really, it's really, when people are thinking of Bitcoin, they're thinking of small blocks, and when Bitcoin Cash is brought up, it's really big blocks, right? But it's still fundamentally both Bitcoin. So what's happened since that time is there's basically been a war. It's a war that ultimately Bitcoin Cash has lost to retain the identity of Bitcoin. But what's been really interesting with this community is that they formed a particular narrative of the events that have taken place since then. So talking to a number of Bitcoin Cash guys, it's been really interesting. Although I don't agree with everything they say, it's very interesting to see what their worldview is. So their belief is, I guess you could say, a little bit conspiratorial. So their belief was that the real believers in Bitcoin and the real vision of Satoshi were in the big block community. And the reason why they lost was that there was a company called Blockstream. And what Blockstream was a company that was ultimately funded and controlled by Visa. And Blockstream was a company that helped, they basically gave a lot of developers to the Bitcoin Foundation to help run the network and basically be a contributor in the space. Now, the supposed conspiracy theory, as I call it, of the Bitcoin Cash people was that Visa wanted to put a lot of people into the Bitcoin space who would be keen on retaining the status quo of small blocks so it couldn't compete with the fast transaction speed of Visa. So if this was an elaborate scheme to, if this was an elaborate scheme to ultimately sabotage Bitcoin, from the Bitcoin Cash's perspective, it was actually successful, because ultimately, to this day, Bitcoin still can't compete with Visa after all these years. And that even includes, despite the fact that you've got the SegWit upgrade and you've got Bitcoin Lightning, Bitcoin still can't compete with the transaction speed of Visa. It's more expensive than Visa. It's more expensive and more useless than PayPal, frankly, if you're just using standard on-chain transactions. So from the Bitcoin Cash's perspective, this was kind of like a coup d'etat within the Bitcoin community to ensure that Bitcoin is useless, right? And the people within that community, the small block community, they had ultimately changed their ideology in regards to what Bitcoin was supposed to be. So remember how I keep bringing up the white paper and what the original vision of Satoshi was, which is supposed to be a peer-to-peer means of exchange. Let me get out of the way here. Remember how I kept going on about how Satoshi's vision was that Bitcoin was supposed to be a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash? Well, the vision of Bitcoin maxis has changed since then, and it's one of the reasons why, although I'm not pro Bitcoin Cash at all, it's one of the reasons why I'm very against Bitcoin maxis, because most of them don't actually share this vision anymore. They don't believe in Bitcoin as being a peer-to-peer means of exchange. What they want it to be is simply a store of value, which is a narrative that's kind of emerged from this era. So they couldn't necessarily. The thing is that the people who were the big blockers were the real fundamentalists who wanted to fulfill Bitcoin's what it was supposed, like Satoshi's vision, whereas the people who wanted small blocks, who wanted to retain the status quo, ultimately they're arguing against Bitcoin's founding vision, right? They wanted to retain the block size, ultimately sabotaging it and making it useless so people couldn't essentially use it for what it was meant for. So their rallying cry, their motto became what originally was, which was a being a peer-to-peer means of exchange, to being a store of value. And that's why Bitcoin maxis are I call them Bitcoin boomers. The reason why Bitcoin boomers are so zealous about the reason why they don't have anything to do with any other coin is because they're of the belief that Bitcoin actually isn't supposed to be used for anything. Like, they're not thinking like, I'm gonna buy a car with my Bitcoin. They're not thinking I'm gonna pay my rent with crypto with Bitcoin. They're not thinking I'm gonna pay my workers in Bitcoin. They're not thinking I'm gonna buy groceries with Bitcoin. They're just taking their Bitcoin, sitting on it, and just holding it because they just believe it's the main purpose is just to be used as a vehicle to hedge against inflation, which is correct, but it's kind of similar to gold boomers, right? Like, and I love gold, but the problem with the people that buy gold, like, they have this idea, this abstract idea that, once civilization collapses, they can then use their gold bars to like buy fucking heads of lettuce, right? It's completely impractical, right? But it's a vision they've created in their head that is actually not really in alignment with reality. Like, crypto is supposed to be used. You're not just supposed to be buying it for the purpose of speculating it. You're not supposed to be buying it just to sit on it and not do anything with it. You're supposed to actually use it. And this is ultimately the problem with Bitcoin maxis to this day. They don't actually use it. And anything that comes along that's supposed to be a solution to this fundamental flaw, they deride as shitcoiners and basically heretics. So the Bitcoin community has fundamentally changed from that time, and it still affects us to this day, because the Bitcoin maxis they kind of hold sway on public opinion, and many people haven't really thought about these issues in a long time. And this is just kind of the case, when you talk to anyone in Bitcoin about, how do you actually use your Bitcoin to buy stuff? Like, what are you actually using it for? They have like no answer for it, right? But they feel justified in their opinion because they're like, well, it's all right because it's a store of value. The price is going to go up and stuff like that. And one day I'll eventually be able to use it, ignoring the fact that there are many solutions that were put in place. Bitcoin Cash was meant as a solution that got rejected. Fine. Then Ethereum and all of its ERC tokens with stable coins coming on and using them to be a solution. The Bitcoin maxis rejected that. They rejected all the other cheap solutions like Litecoin, Monero. They just rejected everything, and it's to the point where like the average person in Bitcoin has absolutely no use for their crypto. They just sit on it. They just waste it. It's a complete waste of everything that's been fought for. Anyway, that's my rant about Bitcoin maxis and how Bitcoin Cash was created. If you like this channel, make sure to subscribe. And if you are actually into what cryptocurrency was supposed to be used for, which is a peer-to-peer means of electronic cash and you actually want to use it to buy and sell things, and you want to use crypto in a decentralized fashion, make sure you use my referral links in the description down below for HODL HODL and local coin swap. There are so many things you can do on peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanges. If you check out some of my the videos on my channel, I've got videos about how you can use crypto to buy things on Amazon. I've got videos on how you can use cryptocurrency to buy airline tickets. You can use cryptocurrency to buy pretty much anything you want, but you have to do it through a peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchange, ideally one that's non-custodial, which means funds aren't actually stored on the exchange itself. So you can use my referral links in the description down below if you're interested in using cryptocurrency in this manner, and I will see you next time.